It started as just another school day for 16-year-old Maya Carter, but she had no idea what was coming. Sitting in the back of her history class, she did her best to stay focused, until her teacher, Mr. Reynolds, singled her out. His tone was sharp, his words humiliating. At first, she thought he was just being strict, but it didn't take long for her to realize the truth. The way he spoke to her, the way he dismissed her answers, the way he made her feel small, it wasn't just about schoolwork, it was personal. Maya wanted to stand up for herself, but she also didn't want to make things worse. So she kept quiet. But what Mr. Reynolds didn't know was that Maya wasn't alone in this fight. Her father, Captain James Carter, had spent years upholding justice, and when he found out what was happening to his daughter, everything changed. Maya kept her head down for the rest of the class, her heart pounding with frustration. Every time she tried to answer a question, Mr. Reynolds cut her off. Every time she made a point, he twisted her words. It wasn't just strict teaching. He was pushing her, testing her patience, almost like he wanted her to break. The other students noticed, exchanging uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak up. They had seen this happen before. As the bell rang, Maya hurried to pack her things, but before she could leave, Mr. Reynolds called her back. "You need to learn some respect, young lady," he said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "Kids like you think you can do whatever you want, but not in my classroom." His words stung, but Maya bit her tongue. She had heard those kinds of comments before, coded words meant to make her feel less than. On the walk home, Maya's mind raced. She had always done well in school, always followed the rules. Why was Mr. Reynolds treating her like this? Was it just her, or had he done this to other students too? She thought about telling her father, but she hesitated. He had enough to deal with at work, and she didn't want him out of his stress. But deep down, she knew this wasn't something she could ignore. That evening at dinner, Captain Carter immediately noticed something was off. "Everything okay, Maya?" he asked, his sharp eyes scanning her face. She forced a small smile, but he wasn't convinced. "Talk to me." His voice was calm but firm. Maya hesitated, but before she could say anything, her phone buzzed with a message from a classmate, one that made her stomach drop. Maya's hands trembled as she picked up her phone. The message was from her friend Jordan. *, "You're not the only one. He's been doing this to others too." *, attached was a screenshot from a group chat where students shared their experiences with Mr. Reynolds: cutting remarks, unfair grades, constant humiliation. Some had complained, but nothing ever changed. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just her. And that meant this wasn't just about one bad day. This was a pattern. She looked up at her father, his eyes still fixed on her, waiting for an answer. She could lie, pretend everything was fine, but she knew better. Captain Carter was trained to read people. He would see right through her. Taking a deep breath, she slid her phone across the table. He frowned, scanning the messages. His face remained calm, but Maya could see the shift in his expression, his jaw tightening, his fingers gripping the edge of the phone just a little too hard. "This has been happening for a while." His voice was steady, but Maya could hear the controlled anger underneath. She nodded. "I didn't know it was this bad until now." Captain Carter exhaled, setting the phone down carefully. "And no one's done anything about it." Maya shook her head. People tried. Nothing happened. Silence stretched between them. She had expected him to say he would take care of it right away, but instead he sat back, deep in thought. She knew that look. He wasn't just angry. He was strategizing. Meanwhile, at school the next day, the air felt heavier. Whispers followed Maya down the hallway. Somehow, word had spread that she had spoken up. When she walked into class, Mr. Reynolds barely glanced at her, but there was something different in his demeanor, like he knew, like he was watching. Maya felt the weight of every stare as she took her seat. Her classmates weren't just curious, they were waiting. Some looked impressed, others nervous, but no one said a word. Even Jordan, who had messaged her the night before, only gave her a quick nod. Mr. Reynolds started the lesson as if nothing had changed, but Maya wasn't fooled. His usual smugness was gone, replaced with something colder, more calculated. He'd moved through the class, his eyes lingering on her just a little too long. Then, halfway through the lesson, he did something he had never done before. He called on her, but not to humiliate her. "Maya, since you seem to think you know so much," he said smoothly, "why don't you come up and explain this to the class?" She hesitated. This was different. This wasn't the usual snide remark or dismissive comment. This was a challenge, a test. Maya stood, ignoring the way her heart pounded in her chest, and walked to the board. She picked up the marker, steadying her breath. She knew the answer. She had studied. She wasn't going to let him shake her. Carefully, she explained the concept, her voice stronger than she expected. When she finished, she turned back, waiting for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, with a slow smile, he said, "That's almost right." Laughter rippled through the class. Maya felt her face heat up, but before she could respond, the classroom door swung open. Standing in the doorway, in full uniform, was Captain Carter. His presence filled the room instantly, his gaze locked onto Mr. Reynolds. The room fell silent. Mr. Reynolds' smirk vanished. Maya's father took a step forward. "We need to talk." For the first time since Maya had met him, Mr. Reynolds looked unsettled. His usual arrogance flickered, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice unnaturally light, "is there a problem?" Maya's father didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, his presence alone commanding the room. Then, in a voice calm but firm, he said, "Step outside." The entire class held its breath. Mr. Reynolds hesitated, glancing around as if looking for an escape. But there wasn't one. With a tight nod, he walked to the door, and Maya's father followed, closing it behind them. The moment they were gone, whispers erupted. "Did you see his face?" Someone murmured. "He actually looked scared." Maya's hands gripped the edge of her desk. She had never seen her father like that, so controlled, yet so intense. But before she could process it, Jordan nudged her phone toward her. "You need to see this," he whispered. She glanced down at the screen and froze. A video had been posted in their school group chat, grainy but clear enough. It showed Mr. Reynolds in the hallway, talking to another teacher. But it wasn't just small talk. His voice was low, angry. Asterisk, "She thinks she can get away with this. We'll see about that." Asterisk. Maya's stomach dropped. This wasn't over. Before she could react, the door burst open. Mr. Reynolds stormed back in, his face red, his eyes darting to her like a predator locking onto its target. Whatever had just happened outside that door hadn't ended things, it had escalated them, and Maya had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. Mr. Reynolds stood at the front of the class, his face tight with anger. He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but then he stopped. His eyes flicked toward Maya, then toward the door. Whatever had happened with Captain Carter outside, it had shaken him, but it hadn't stopped him. Maya's pulse quickened. She knew that look. He wasn't backing down. If anything, he was doubling down. Before he could speak, the classroom phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the tense silence. Mr. Reynolds stiffened, then strode over to answer it. "Reynolds." His voice was clipped. Then, after a few seconds, his face paled. He glanced at Maya again, then at the class. "Yes, I understand." He hung up, his fingers gripping the receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. For a moment, no one moved. Then the whispers started again, louder this time. Did he just leave? What was that about? Maya's phone buzzed. A message from her father. Asterisk, "Meet me in the office." "Now, asterisk." Her heart pounded as she grabbed her bag and hurried out of the room, Jordan closed behind. The hallway felt different, charged with something she couldn't quite name. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her bag and hurried out of the room, Jordan closed behind. The hallway felt different, charged with something she couldn't quite name. When she reached the main office, her father was waiting, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood the principal, and next to him, two officers Maya didn't recognize. Captain Carter turned to her. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but serious. "There's something you need to know." Maya braced herself. "We weren't just looking into his behavior toward you. There's more." He exhaled. "Mr. Reynolds has been under investigation for a while, and today he made a mistake." Her breath caught. Her father continued, "That phone call, it wasn't just about you. Someone finally came forward with evidence, something bigger, and now he's not coming back." Maya's mind spun. She had expected a fight, another confrontation. But this was something else. Jordan leaned in. "So, what happens now?" Captain Carter's expression didn't change. "Now, justice happens." Maya exhaled slowly, the weight of everything settling in. It wasn't the ending she had imagined, but maybe it was the one that was meant to be. Maya sat in the office, trying to process everything. Mr. Reynolds was gone, just like that. For so long, she had felt powerless, trapped in a situation she couldn't control. But now, the truth had finally come out, not just about her, but about all the students he had mistreated. And it wasn't just about the classroom anymore. Whatever her father and the officers had uncovered, it was serious enough to make sure he wouldn't be able to do this again. Jordan nudged her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know this wasn't easy, but you did the right thing speaking up." His voice was gentle, but she could still hear the weight behind it. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for others too. Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. She had been so afraid to say anything at first, worried it would only make things worse. But in the end, the truth had won. The next day at school felt different, lighter. There were still whispers, still looks, but this time they weren't filled with fear. They were filled with something else, respect. A few students even came up to her, sharing their own stories, thanking her for speaking out. As she walked through the halls, she realized something. She wasn't just the girl who had been bullied by a teacher anymore. She was the girl who had fought back, who had made a difference. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt something she hadn't before. Free.